Place Australia acknowledges traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognises their continuing connection to lands, waters, skies and communities. We pay our deepest respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples.
Traditional policy models tend to suffer from the fact that they're made within silos. So there's different agencies and departments, different levels of government. And so you get fragmented policy making, really. I'm Alison Roberts. I'm from the Productivity Commission. I think the other thing about traditional models is they can often be deficit-based and very programmatic. So what are we trying to fix rather than strengths-based and looking at and learning from what is working well. What all that means is that it leads to worse outcomes, particularly for people who've got complex needs who then need to navigate all those different parts of the system.
In this series, you've heard how shared decision-making can transform communities. But one of the common concerns is that the structure of government can make it harder. Funding models, accountability requirements, legislative constraints. From a government perspective, the barriers to engaging in shared decision-making are real. But shared decision-making doesn't require a revolution. It can be as simple as a conversation between community and government that genuinely shapes a decision. Or it can go further, a government department delegating decision-making power to a community organisation. These are two ends of a complex landscape. So what needs to shift to better enable shared decision-making? I'm Brooke Boney, proud Gamilaroi woman and journalist with a background in public policy. From Partnerships for Local Action and Community Empowerment, this is Making Place Matter, a podcast where we ask who decides. In this episode, the final one of the series, you'll be hearing from communities and government about the tangible things that enable shared decision-making to happen, how shifting funding can unlock benefits, and what government can gain by listening to and working with community. The Productivity Commission is an independent research and advisory body to the federal government. They look at whether government policy and spending is having the impact it's meant to and suggest alternative or more productive ways of working if needed. As a commissioner, Alison Roberts has extensive experience understanding complex public policy challenges. So why are some governments reluctant to engage in shared decision-making?
Look, I think there's a keenness. I'm not sure that I suspect the reluctance is maybe driven by, it's certainly not through a lack of goodwill or a desire to move towards this. There's a couple of things. Some of the barriers to that are structural things. So you've got misaligned incentives. So, where one area could make a change, like a state or territory, they fund hospital services, for example, but the benefits might accrue elsewhere. Likewise, federally funded general practice, for example, and that can discourage efforts to collaborate sometimes. There are cultural challenges as well. So by that I mean when you, if you're a public servant in a department or agency and you have accountability for budget, there can be some reluctance to find ways to allow for devolved decision making, because it's my responsibility to manage this, and building trust can be hard. So saying it's okay to hand this over for others to be involved in that decision making. I think the other thing that we experienced in talking with people is there can sometimes also be reform fatigue. There's been a lot of change, and so this is another new way that we might need to think about doing things. And so even though there's benefits to it, it can make people reluctant to want to take on more.
Alison doesn't speak for the whole of government. She's an advisor, but she was recently involved in one report undertaken by the Productivity Commission that looked at a challenging public policy area, care.
So we were looking at care because it's important to all of us at different stages of our lives, from early childhood through to aged care. And in Australia, we've been fortunate to expect care to be safe and of a high quality and to be accessible. But what we've seen and what we heard is that as population needs are changing, it's coming under increasing pressure. So there is more need for care services. There are more people experiencing hardship and complex and chronic diseases. And there is a challenge for us all on how to deliver that sustainably.
The Productivity Commission held more than 100 meetings with organisations and individuals and received more than 250 submissions.
In our report, we recommended that the government focus on 3 areas of reform to really strengthen connection across the sectors and reduce some of that siloed decision making that I was talking about before. And those 3 areas were firstly regulatory alignment in quality and safety across the care sectors. The second area is around embedding collaborative commissioning, so the commissioning of services in a collective way with input from communities in a place-based approach. And the third one is about adopting a new approach to investment in prevention and early intervention.
Collaborative commissioning is when multiple partners, community providers and funders all work together to understand community needs, design and deliver services, and monitor and evaluate outcomes. Alison explains how collaborative commissioning supports shared decision making.
It supports shared decision making primarily because it is place-based. So services that are commissioned through this model are tailored to local needs and to community priorities rather than being dictated centrally. So the same service everywhere, for example. It's not a top-down model. So it empowers local communities to enable them to have a say in decision-making, but also to have some accountability for achieving outcomes at the local level.
Collaborative commissioning can reduce silos and allow communities to share decision-making with government and other stakeholders. This is an area Alison says is ripe for reform. Done well, it can be an effective and more efficient way for government to invest in care. So we have the Productivity Commission recommending more collaboration between government departments, recognising the importance of giving communities a greater voice. But what do the communities themselves want to see change? Let's hear from the people involved in place-based initiatives. What do you think needs to change from government, from service providers to better enable shared decision making?
Trust, and not to lament the perceived notion that it's going to be really complex to connect with community.
Jan Burney is the project coordinator for the Millgrove Residents Action Group, or MRAG. MRAG have worked together collaboratively and robustly for 20 years. Over that time, they've built trust and strong relationships. That is the foundation governments can lean on when they come into a community.
Because fundamentally, towns all have similar needs. So this huge benefit of slightly modifying or nuancing what you're trying to deliver, whether it be a process, a service or a development, in an individual way to a township can really mean the difference between efficacy and success rather than waste and apathy.
And Alison Roberts says if the trust already exists in a community, that's a huge advantage for government.
Yes, it takes time to build trust, but the other side of that is that place-based approaches can sometimes provide a fast track. So if you've got a program that's been designed nationally and you want to know, well, how are we going to be able to get this off the ground really quickly? The best people to talk to in a region are the people who are going to be doing the delivery, to find out maybe there's local relationships that already exist. And then I think there's another element that's less sort of structural, and it's more around allowing time for trust to build as well. Because I think the examples that we saw that were working, where things have been tried, allowed to work, and also sometimes allowed to fail, so that people develop the skills in working together on what are the outcomes we're targeting, how are we going to get there, who's doing what, doing all of that work, because that builds confidence in the partnership and it gives people a sense that, oh, we can do this and we can do it on bigger projects too.
Evelyn, what do you think needs to change to better enable shared decision making in communities?
Look, it all gets back to listening. People just need to listen.
For Evelyn Sharber and William Tilmouth, the co-chairs of Children's Ground, they want a process where governments respect the knowledge of community and for government to take the time to allow community to shape a solution.
Don't pretend you're listening. Don't sit back and say, I'm such and such because I've been duly elected. That doesn't give you the power. That gives you just the opportunity to do it. And you've got to make sure that you listen to people who you're talking for.
We need to actually work out time frame for those decision making and how we're going to actually do it so that everybody's actually involved. So the time frames need to be reasonable in regards to so that community can take control, not within a government time frame.
This is a sentiment shared by Catherine Little, the CEO of SNAKE, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children's peak body.
It means slowing down at the front end to identify how many people need to be spoken to, how they might want to give you information, what information you might need to share, how you be authentic in that, and truly not come in with an idea that you're imposing, but rather to say, there's a little issue here. What do you mob see? And how do you think you can be part of it? How do we design it? What do you see working? How do we evaluate it? And how do we make sure that we're funding it correctly? Almost immediately, you get significantly different results. But that first bit does need a bit of a slowdown.
If we think about what structures can better enable shared decision making, funding is one area Amy Robinson says can be improved.
I feel like we've got this, and I think it's like government probably need to now step up and think about how they work with communities and different funding models.
Amy is the Executive Officer at Greater Shepparton Lighthouse Project, based in regional Victoria.
We're really lucky at Lighthouse that we've had a flexible and place-based funding model through the Department of Education. For next year will be 10 years of co-funding in that way. We leverage, nearly the same again from philanthropy and local donations from our community. But that flexible and place-based funding model has been the key driver in why Lighthouse has been able to respond to community. So I think, we really need to start coming to the party with how do we change policy decisions that are, we need to let community lead and find the channels and the funding mechanisms to enable that to happen.
Flexible funding has allowed Lighthouse to develop programs tailored to the Shepparton community. And it's one of the most practical things governments can do to better enable shared decision making. Alison Roberts says she understands government's caution in working this way, but there are mechanisms that can give government the confidence to step back.
Because there is a sense of risk, and that's understandable, I guess, because there is often a lot of funding that goes into these models, and as soon as you have more devolved responsibility, you relinquish some control over that. I think one of the ways that we understood from looking at other models that you can give confidence is through having a really transparent approach. So the reporting is done transparently, there's accountability against those. And so in our recommendation, we said that once the organisations come together to do that planning and service design, they then would have to say, these are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So I think the other thing that is a challenge with short-term budgeting is grant-based funding that runs out in fairly short time frames, doesn't allow for that time to build capacity, to build relationships, and then to do the delivery. And before you know it, you're already having to apply for funding and you're not sure if you're going to get it. We heard that story a lot.
There's a balance to strike here. We want community to be accountable on how they spend government funds, but we don't want the reporting to become burdensome and distract from the actual work communities are doing.
Although they're well-intentioned to ensure responsible spending, which is something we all care about, that money isn't wasted, I think sometimes the focus is not necessarily on the right or the most important things. So if we think about the regulatory environments for, say, care and support providers, these are really administratively burdensome. So they're often reporting on the same things to different auditors and standards regimes. And the problem with that is it's important to check on those things, but that compliance burden takes people away from frontline service delivery and the kind of relational aspects of care, which is not a great basis on which to build partnerships and share decisions. So I think the other part is that the reporting itself is often, in fact, most often based on outputs. So how many services did we deliver? How many people did we see? How many units? Rather than the outcomes. So how are people feeling? What are their health status and their quality of life as well? You know, my understanding is that true shared decision making needs us to have reporting and monitoring systems that actually focus where we're trying to change outcomes. And you need community input into that, which is where you get shared decision making, right? Because it's also about how that information is interpreted rather than just saying to the funders, oh, we've done X number of services.
Underpinning these structural challenges is something harder to shift: the rhythm of 3 levels of government. Election cycles shape funding cycles, which shape what government is willing to commit to and for how long. Catherine Little explains the impact this has on communities.
And those election cycles across the country don't line up. You've got 3-year terms, for our federal government, and that'll happen at one stage. And then you've got 4-year terms in some of the states and territories, and they don't fire at the same time. So at any point in time when you're looking at massive system reform, one of those will be stalling, one of those will be reformatting. And it's at that point in time in particular that we find the government's commitment to shared decision making becomes something that people think is nice to have and maybe optional, when in actual fact, every single state and territory and the Commonwealth Government signed an agreement to say it is critical and fundamental to getting outcomes. There is no ambiguity in this.
That agreement is the National Agreement on Closing the Gap, developed in partnership between Australian governments and the Coalition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peak organisations.
It isn't step up for 1 year and then step away and then attack the program that you helped develop because you have an election cycle. And let's be honest, it's really easy to attack Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in an election cycle. It's saying stay the course, embed what you need to embed, do not flex, do not react, stay the course, work with your community and do what you promised you would do when you signed that agreement.
As you've heard elsewhere in this series, shared decision making can be bipartisan if we acknowledge we're all looking for the same outcome.
Look, it always has to be, what is the outcome that you're after? And even the work that Snake does, we're always going back to what is it that we're actually trying to achieve here, and resetting yourself into the fact that you're not there to get a good project. You're there to change the outcome on the ground for the people who need it the most.
Catherine shared an example of when a government department did everything you've heard so far. They listened to the community, gave decision-making power to a community organisation, and were able to transform funding to deliver a tailored outcome for that community.
One of the best case examples we've heard relating to how you might do that, I only heard just the other day, and it came out of Tasmania, the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre.
Catherine says the relevant government department had decided they were going to be more efficient in how they managed a particular child and family response.
And it basically said we're going through all of our coffers in all of our departments, and we have identified where there is a responsibility to the health and well-being of Aboriginal children and their families. And we're going to find a way to make sure that all of these systems fire at once. This is great. This is exactly what the National Agreement has asked people to do, because our children and our families do not sit in government departments. We are whole entities.
The departments went to the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre, TAC, which is an Aboriginal community organisation, to tell them about the new programs they'd developed.
And the TAC said, well, these programs that you want us to deliver, they're not the ones our community would design. And we need time, and we need you to step back and work with us while we go out and talk to our communities.
So that's what the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre did. They went out and spoke to their community.
And they met people wherever they were, whether it was the shopping centre, whether it was visiting mob in hospital or aged care centres, whether they were going to schools at pick-up time, whether it was in the services that they already delivered. And they asked them what they wanted and what they needed and what it would mean to develop an incredible community response. And even as an Aboriginal organisation, you know, they said we had to sit very uncomfortably at times. For all the things that I've identified, we know our mob are doing it really tough. And when people are doing it tough, sometimes they just want to be heard, and sometimes whatever's hurting them right now is going to come out. And they said we sat through that and we listened, and we came up with a brand new framework that was nothing like we ever thought we'd design. And it said, we want to start from scratch, and we're going to turn this whole funding cycle on its head, and we're going to turn program delivery on its head, and we're going to make sure it is our community that is driving it. It is our community that is evaluating it, because at the end of the day, it is our community that will develop it. And that took incredible bravery from the departments that were working with the centre. It took incredible staunchness from the centre itself to be able to push back on something that they could have quite easily said, oh, this is easy, let's just hit the ground and do it. But they said, no, if we're true to the sentiment of closing the gap on Indigenous disadvantage, then we have to recognise that fundamentally there is something wrong with the service system as it is designed today.
What would you like to see change in policy or funding to better enable shared decision making?
I think it's about putting the stuff into the beginning rather than letting it wait.
Jo Kelly is the Executive Director of Learning the Macleay, based in Kempsey in New South Wales. For Jo, the promise of shared decision making isn't just better services for her community. It's more about services addressing the root causes rather than the symptoms.
So there's a really good book, audio book that I listen to on a regular basis, and that's like my go-to type book, called Upstream by Dan Heath. It's about the systems work. So, you know, how do we stop the stuff downstream from coming all the time? The only way we do that is if we look at what's upstream. So, you know, that's the work that we do. And in that systems change, in that shared decision-making space, it's how do we collaborate together effectively and efficiently so that we're not continuing to working in the downstream space. It's a lot easier to work in the upstream space because we don't have to deal with the issues, because we're dealing with the causes of it. And we're not, you know, it's that layering back of the onion. You know, each layer is a way of getting to the root cause of it. So that's the work that we need to be all sharing together and sitting in that space, so that we can again come back for the betterment of our community.
Do you think then that the conversation should shift more to what governments can gain by sharing decision-making power with communities? I mean, then you've got shared accountability, you've got, you know, shared responsibility for the outcomes, and also, you know, shared joy when we finally do sort of move closer towards what the goals are.
Yeah, exactly. All of the above. I think, as I said at the outset, a deficit-based approach doesn't really help when we're thinking about, I think you put it so well, what is there to gain? And there's great gains to be had. So better policy that's informed and shaped by local communities, their needs, and actually the knowledge of what has worked, what is working, different ways of knowing, of doing. You know, this is what we stand to gain.
Being part of this series has genuinely inspired hope in me. Hearing the stories from communities across Australia has reminded me that no matter how entrenched a problem feels, it can be worked through, especially when people closest to the issue are empowered to create change. Luke Craven, Chief Executive Officer at Place, agrees.
It feels really hopeful. It feels really energetic. And, you know, the spaces that we've been speaking about, emergency management, family and domestic violence, child protection, those are really hard places to work in, and people do it because they're passionate. And when you're able to do shared decision-making effectively, it can cut through some of that cynicism and help people build faith and empathy in each other, that they are there for a shared goal.
I wanted to come back to William Tillmouth. William, who you met in episode 2 and 3, is an Arrernte man and a member of the Stolen Generations. His work now with Children's Ground is about giving agency back to the community and creating generational change. Do you feel like the impact of children being able to access, First Nations-led and designed education helps you close like a bit of a loop, like there's a bit of justice in that, you being able to help other people have what you were robbed of?
Yeah, I totally agree with it, because I come from the Stolen Generation and they took away from me my family, they took away from me my culture, my identity, my language, my country. I look at kids today with language and culture and that, and I feel very envious, because that's where I could have been a long time ago if government hadn't thought they knew what was best for me and decided to do what they did. And it's something that I wouldn't recommend to anyone, but having done what I've done and doing what I'm doing, I know I'm on the right track.
Thanks to Alison Roberts, Jan Burney, Amy Robinson, Catherine Little, Evelyn Sharber and William Tillmouth for their time. I'm Brooke Boney. This has been Making Place Matter. Stay up to date with more from Place by heading to placeaustralia.org, and you can also find more resources there. Making Place Matter is a podcast from Partnerships for Local Action and Community Empowerment. This series, Who Decides, is produced by Dead Set Studios.